Hello everyone, my name is George Rhodes. Hopefully you can all see my slides. I'm a director for a company called Allable. We are an accessibility consultancy company. I'm also a PhD student here at the University of Kent. So I'm quite invested in accessibility for the university and in general. Today I am going to be talking to you about mapping public sector accessibility legislation compliance, which is a very long title for my presentation. I will try and rattle through this quickly in the interests of time. There's mainly two ways to map accessibility compliance now with the new regulations that Ben mentioned earlier. The first is to monitor the accessibility of websites against those web content accessibility guidelines that Ben was talking about, or if you don't have an infinite amount of time on your hands to do a load of paid work for all of these organisations, the easier thing to do is monitor the quality of accessibility statements, see how they stack up against the legal requirements, and see what people are saying in terms of their level of compliance for the first option. So what are accessibility statements? They're a really important legal document that all public sector bodies have to have as part of the new regulations. It details the level of their compliance for their website, talks about known issues and how users can get help to support them with accessibility problems. There are a number of bits of specific legal wording that people need to include in those, and there's only really one correct template, which is based off of the Government Digital Services sample accessibility statement. I'm really interested in these accessibility statements. I'm interested in what they mean for things like FOIs, things like Equality Act challenges. So I end up looking at an awful lot of these, and there are many different ways that people have done them over the various different EU member states to which the overarching European directive applies. I've looked at, I think it's more than 4,000 statements now across the course of this research. I've looked at statements from the United Kingdom, Denmark, Luxembourg, Spain, and the Netherlands, each of which have their own quirks and ways of doing things. But I'd like to talk to you about the most recent research from the UK. So I published this back in November. It looks at 1,802 organisations across the UK, because I really wanted to compare this to results that I got last year and look at how we've moved on over the course of a year that includes the deadline for all of the regulations coming live. So by now, really, everyone should have a complete statement. This is obviously not correct. And the map that I've got on the right-hand side there, of which you can go and access on our website, everything's published for free up there. So you can go and look up your own accessibility statement if you happen to be a university, college, whoever. A large number of people still don't have correct accessibility statements. There's hundreds that still are poor or no attempts at all, which is really disheartening, because not only are these a legal requirement, they're really important for students, for members of the public, for your staff to be able to get help and move through services as easily as possible. These are some of the results that have come out from the latest research in comparison to previous attempts. There's been some change across the board, but I'm really pleased to say that over the last year, we've seen quite the jump in good and compliant statements, both of which I think are a perfectly acceptable attempt. If you're into the partial poor or no attempt range, that's not quite as good. But either a good or compliant statement, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable. Local gov has really jumped up. Universities already had quite a high level of good and compliant statements. They've moved up as well. The police forces, as I've said for a number of years, have always been a real kind of leader in this space, especially since they've been moving to a single kind of web template, which has made a massive difference. We've also seen jumps in fire and rescue, colleges, although still not as much. The NHS has really taken this on board. An interesting one for anyone that works with disabled students are the disability assessment centres that deal with all of the disabled student allowance, talking about ILPs. They've kind of stayed where they are, and it's a group that I'm really keen to get more transparent accessibility information about their websites out there. Final two, regulators and local council associations have also taken it upon themselves to really push ahead as leaders in their sort of collective communities to try and make sure they've got their accessibility statements published as well. So overall, really, really positive. Still a long way to go. Only a couple really sort of hitting that 50% compliance mark. And there are some common pitfalls. I think when I do look at many of these statements, which is why we're not as far along as I'd like us to be. A lot of people are misusing disproportionate burden, which is an ability within the regulations to claim that you can't meet them for whatever reason right now. A lot of people are making these claims without really having all of the evidence to back it up, and I've seen quite a number be challenged and disappear afterwards because it's realised that they're not disproportionate burden. Some of the excuses really have been quite terrible, to the extent of, oh well, we had a short conversation about this and it was never recorded anywhere. It's like, well, you've based a legal decision on that, so perhaps you should record that somewhere. And another real detriment that I think we focus too much on the legal wording rather than making sure we've got content in these accessibility statements, which is focused on workarounds and reasonable adjustments to really help those users. Instead of saying there's a problem, we don't know how we're going to support you, it should be there's a problem, here's what we've really thought about to try and give you alternative routes or ways around it. This is a really, really important time for this, especially with the regulations coming into full effect. The Government Digital Service are already sending out monitoring reports about this. So many people are receiving these reports, which gives them about 12 weeks to respond and fix their issues before these reports get escalated to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who are the enforcement body for this. Incorrect accessibility statements are a real open door to students and members of the public and for staff for complaints and challenges, especially now where everything is online. There's much more of a case to be made that if lecture content, course content is not accessible, for students, if they don't like their results, to kind of appeal it and say, I feel I've been treated unfairly. And again, the same kind of applies for members of the public who are being supported by other public sector bodies. There's much more of a case now if they're being forced through digital routes. If these digital routes don't work, we are excluding people, we're giving them a much poorer kind of experience. So I think I'm just about to time. So I love talking about maps. I love talking about accessibility statements. If anyone wants to talk more about anything that I've mentioned today, please feel free to contact me. I will mention that is me in that picture for my Twitter handle. Please feel free to email me, find me on Twitter, find the company on Twitter. We are all able. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, George. You're actually ahead of time, so well done.
I could have kept talking for a little bit longer. My bad.
Nick, do we have any questions?
I think I've got this one, Phil.
Okay.
George, questions come in here. Do you contact organisations with poor accessibility statements? The colleague here worries that they may not simply not realise what's going on.
That's a really good question, Stephen. Thank you for that. So I personally don't have time to contact the several hundred organisations to tell them that they are breaking the law. We had a 2-year grace period for these regulations. I know the Government Digital Service and many others have really tried to raise this in people's awareness. I know many people still are finding out that this is a new thing even now. I did at one point email all of the colleges that didn't have correct statements to say, are you aware of this? That was mainly through a concern that colleges had not been kind of provided for as much as, say, local government or universities in the previous sort of advertising about this. So I don't let everyone know, I'm afraid, but you can go and look yourself up on the map. It's on our website. You can go and look up your competitors, other universities, friends, whoever, as well.
Oh, there are a couple more, Phil, if we've got a squeak of time.
Yeah, we've got time for another one, definitely.
Yeah, so there was, as you said, there's a few in the Q&A, George, but just to pick one, what happens if an organisation can't fix an issue within the 12 weeks, or decide that fixing an issue would actually have a detrimental impact on many more students in a different way, e.g. banning virtual reality because blind people can't use it?
Okay, that's another really, really good question. So I'm going to put it out there. I'm not a legal expert, despite having a particular interest in this given set of regulations. For anything to do with the monitoring process, I really, really suggest people go and speak to GDS directly. They will be able to give you answers. I think there are some things to be considered, certainly with the example about virtual reality, because many of those pieces of content, the virtual tours, things like that, can be really, really useful for a wide number of students. It's not about saying if something is not accessible, then we just turn it off. I think it's more about making sure that we're providing alternatives to other students that can't access that content. That content is in some ways specialist and is certainly very useful for certain students which have other ranges of disabilities, whereas the virtual reality stuff is normally not accessible for blind or visually impaired users. So I think it's about providing maybe an audio tour of spaces instead as well. There's a lot of opportunities out there. It's a really interesting question and a really interesting topic, that example in particular. But otherwise, yeah, if something can't be fixed in the 12 weeks, I guess I really suggest you go and speak to GDS.
Thank you, George.
Okay, we've got, I think, about a minute and a half left. Are there any other questions, Steve?
There's one here. It's got 4 sort of likes here. Do we have any idea how many universities have had a monitoring report?
Again, probably a question for GDS, I'm afraid. Yeah, I would also love to know that. I really encourage people to, if they're open to it, share their monitoring reports. We've got a lot of communities out there. The JISC mailing list for accessibility is a really, really good place. Instead of us all struggling through this alone, I really, really hope that people share their reports, talk to the communities, because a lot of the things that you're going to go through with those reports, other people will be answering at the same time, if not have already answered. So the more we can come together as a community on this and defend against these reports, work out what is reasonable as, you know, our various sectors, I think that's the best thing we can do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, George. I think that was a really interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.